September 9, 1943, on the morning when the Allies stormed the Italian coastline at Salerno, who among those exhausted men could have imagined that the real enemy waiting for them wasn't just German firepower, but something far darker lurking in the smoke-filled hills, something that made every heartbeat sound like a countdown to an unseen terror? Beneath the crashing waves and the endless whine of incoming shells, medics found themselves carrying more than bandages and morphine. They carried the lives of shattered soldiers through a campaign doomed by chaotic strategy, broken communication, and the brutal resolve of defenders who knew every ridge, every valley, and every shadow where death could hide. And as the landings collapsed into confusion, countless wounded lay screaming along the sand while medics crawled through the surf, dragging bodies that felt colder than the sea itself, whispering to men whose eyes were turning glassy before their last breath could even leave their lips. The failure of Allied intelligence meant no one predicted how quickly the Germans would counterattack, unleashing Tiger tanks that tore across the plains like metallic beasts while the sky rained burning shrapnel that carved open the earth and left limbs scattered like torn branches from some monstrous tree. And in this chaos, a young combat medic named Hayes sprinted from crater to crater, trying to plug arterial wounds with trembling hands as he listened to the chilling echo of German boots, crunching over stone, closer, faster, merciless, while the smell of burned flesh drifted through the humid Italian air like an omen no one could outrun. The terrain worked like an accomplice to the defenders. Steep mountains forced the Allies into narrow choke points where machine guns sliced down entire platoons, leaving medics to wade through bodies still steaming from the blast. And on one night, Hayes remembered forever. The fog rolled in so thick that he could barely see the outline of the dying man he was treating, until a sudden flare illuminated the hillside and revealed dozens of silhouettes hanging limp on barbed wire, their faces frozen in terror as if the battlefield itself had consumed them. An image so horrifying that even hardened officers avoided speaking about it afterward, choosing silence over nightmares. Command had underestimated the German tactics of elastic defense, allowing enemy troops to withdraw, regroup, and strike again with ferocity that shattered Allied morale. And as Hayes dragged a barely breathing sergeant toward safety, he heard distant cries echoing from a ravine where a squad had been ambushed earlier that afternoon, their bodies left twisted beneath toppled olive trees as if the earth had spit them out in disgust. And he wondered how many souls would be swallowed before daylight returned. Supplies ran thin, ammunition dwindled, and every medic was forced to make impossible choices. Who to save, who to leave, which wound was worth the last syringe of morphine, while artillery blasts shook the ground so violently that some men swore they felt the mountain breathing beneath them like some ancient beast awakened by the war. The Allies' failure to secure air superiority turned every supply route into a death march. And Hayes recalled one convoy tore apart by Stuka dive bombers, their screaming sirens so terrifying that the men described it as the sound of death learning to sing. And when Hayes reached the smoking remains, he found a soldier still alive though pinned under the burning chassis of a truck, his skin blistered and peeling while he begged for water he couldn't swallow. And as Hayes held his hand, the man whispered that he could hear footsteps in the flames calling his name. Footsteps Hayes would later dream about for years. As the campaign dragged on, exhaustion hollowed out the soldiers until they resembled moving ghosts, their eyes sunken, their uniforms stiff with dried blood. And medics like Hayes became grim guardians of the boundary between life and death, dragged endlessly from one horror to the next while wondering why the grand Allied push had slowed to something like a funeral procession stretching across the entire peninsula. Strategic disagreements between commanders created delays that cost thousands of lives, and one mistimed advance left Hayes trapped in a bombed-out farmhouse with 3 wounded men while German patrols moved outside, their whispering voices drifting through the broken windows like the cold breath of something hunting them. And he remembered pressing his ear to the wall, hearing the boots stop just inches away before moving on, leaving behind a silence so suffocating that even the wounded men held their breath as if the farmhouse itself was listening. The failure in Italy was not just military. It was psychological, emotional, and haunting, stamped into the memories of medics who saw more darkness in a single week than most men see in a lifetime. And Hayes, after dragging more than 70 wounded soldiers through mud, blood, and shattered stone, often wondered if the land itself rejected their presence, swallowing whole squads into ravines, collapsing trenches without warning, and sending avalanches of rock tumbling down onto unsuspecting troops whose screams vanished under the rubble. Some nights, under a moon blurred by smoke, Hayes claimed he could hear the whispers of the men he couldn't save calling from the hills, asking why the Allies had come unprepared, why their leaders had misjudged the enemy, and why so many had to die on ground that seemed determined to keep them. And though he never spoke of it openly, others admitted hearing the same haunting echoes, as if the ghosts of Salerno refused to be forgotten. And now, as we revisit this brutal chapter of 1943, one question demands to be asked, a question that still chills the bones of every historian and survivor who studies those disastrous months. What unseen force, strategic or sinister, truly doomed the Allied advance through Italy that year?